Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Scott's Selections. It is currently March 18th. Yes, I already gave out my pick involving March 19th because of the fact that there are no games on today, now there's one between NJIT and Quinnipiac, but we're just not going to get into that one. But as I promised yesterday, I'm going to be doing a live stream right now for about an hour or so where I will be going through my college basketball bracket, and I will be discussing my thoughts on each of the first-round matchups, including some spreads that have already come up, and I'll just be giving my lean so far as the NCAA tournament begins to approach. But I see some people starting to fill into the live stream. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to be starting roughly in just a couple minutes to let some people fill in, just so I don't start and they miss the whole beginning and whatever. But I've already filled out my bracket. Overall, this season, there's different schools of thought with regard to March Madness just in general. And in some cases, you have your very straightforward chalky years where you feel like you already know who the best teams are and the rest is kind of a waste of time. And then in other years, you have pretty much a handful of really good teams, and the rest can pretty much lose at any given time to any given team. And I feel like this year is going to be the latter. I don't like to pick in terms of a bracket absolute chaos, but it would not surprise me if the majority of people's brackets end up virtually destroyed in the first couple of days. And I would not be surprised to see, everyone always goes for that perfect bracket and they go for the $1 million. I wouldn't be surprised if, like most years, that ends on either the first day or the second day, because I think that there will be a lot of upsets in this tournament. But with that being said, I think it's time for us to officially get underway. So the way that I'm going to be going over the bracket is I'm not going to be going according to the rotation numbers. Instead, I'm just going to focus on specific regions, and then I'll be working my way down in the first round and then onward. So I'm going to be starting with the East, then I'm going to go over to the South region, then I'm going to go over the Midwest, and then I'm going to go over to the West. So I'm going to be going in order of the number one seeds, starting from best to worst, and that will start off with the Duke Blue Devils here as they go ahead and take on whoever wins one of the first four games between North Carolina Central and North Dakota State. Now, since everybody knows Duke's going to destroy either of those teams, it's a question of who do I think is going to win that play-in game. And for me, I will be going with North Dakota State to win that play-in game. Does it really matter in the long run? No, not particularly. Both teams are fighting for the right in order to lose by about 40. But North Dakota State is favored by roughly 5.5 points in this play-in game on Wednesday, March 20th against NC Central. And the main reason is the fact that I have already handicapped a game on this channel with North Dakota State, specifically when they took on Oral Roberts a while back, and I actually watched a decent amount of that Summit League tournament. And I mentioned that since South Dakota State lost early, that whole tournament was up for grabs. And North Dakota State does the fundamentals extremely well, as they are a top 20 free throw shooting team in the country. And I see Phil's joining us. How's it going, Phil? Thanks for commenting on the last video. Nice to see you again. And overall, North Dakota State shoots roughly over 75% from the foul line, so I think they will be able to capitalize on that. North Carolina Central did do a very good job of winning their conference tournament championship against Norfolk State, but at the same point, they pretty much only have one player. North Dakota State's a little bit more balanced, so I think North Dakota State will win. In terms of betting, I would lean towards North Dakota State in that one, but 5.5 is a decent amount of points for a play-in game in a neutral site, so I wouldn't really touch that game in terms of, but I do like North Dakota State to win that play-in game, just to lose to Duke by about 40 points, give or take, and we're going to move on after that. Second game, you have VCU versus UCF. This game, if I had to lean in any direction whatsoever, it would be the under between these teams, based on the fact that both teams, the over-under right now is at roughly 127. I have to lean under there. UCF does have a decent amount of weapons on offense, but anytime you have Taco Fall, the 7'6" giant in the middle, with that zone that UCF likes to play, VCU is going to have to settle for outside shots, and they are not the greatest outside shooting team. Plus, it's also important to note that VCU's they lost in the first round of their conference tournament to Rhode Island, but it's actually important to notice that their leading scorer, Marcus Evans for VCU, actually injured his knee in the last game of in their last game. His MRI came back clean, but there's going to be some pain there with his knee. He will play, of course, but if he's not at 100% and he's the leading scorer on the team and he will definitely not be at 100%, there's no way that I could actually assume that this game will get into the 60s for both teams. VCU, everybody knows them from the Shaka Smart years for their, half full court press and their quality defense. They're giving up less than 62 points per game. So this defense is still extremely elite. And they're also a really terrible three-point shooting team, as they are currently shooting 330th in three-point percentage, or roughly 30.7%, and 122nd, I should say, in offensive efficiency. So UCF is a team that loves to play the 2-3 zone with the 7'6" guy in the middle. They love to dare their opponents to shoot threes, and VCU can shoot threes, and their leading scorer is injured in this game. And UCF, they do have some weapons, with B.J. Taylor's averaging 16 points, as well as Aubrey Dawkins averaging 15.2 points, who's a very solid three-point shooter. But VCU is still giving up 62 points per game. I have to assume that this game is going to be somewhere in the 110s to low 120s. The early money has come in on the over in this game, as it started at 124.5 and it went up to 127. To be honest, I don't really get the move. For me, if I wanted to be like extra safe, I would take the first half under, because of the fact that VCU with Evans at less than 100% should definitely be out of sync, considering the fact that their best player is injured and he's not at 100%, where UCF tends to start off a little bit low on offense. Taco Fall can get whatever he wants, but Taylor's a very solid player, but he mostly forces it and gets to the foul line, and VCU is not really prone to fouling. This game, for me, just screams high 50s, low 60s. I think 127 is too high. And in terms of spreads, VCU was the favorite at -1. Now UCF is the favorite at -1. I like UCF in this game to win outright, based on the fact that Evans is not 100% and they cannot shoot the three-point ball. I just think it's a terrible matchup for VCU. They were rolling going to the conference tournament before losing to Rhode Island, and UCF has very solid guards to handle VCU's aggressive nature on defense. And UCF also will prevent any layups in the paint, assuming Taco Fall stays out of foul trouble. So my leans for that game will be the UCF -1, as well as the under 127. But for safekeeping, I would take the first half under and whatever line that is. I think that game's going to be, I don't know, like 28-25 at the half. I don't see many points in that game at all, and I think both teams will start off slow on a neutral site after the added layoff, with both teams losing relatively early in their conference tournaments. Now, moving on, we have our first 5-12 matchup between Mississippi State and Liberty. And Liberty is one of these teams where people will probably immediately write off because they're going up against an SEC foe that was ranked for the majority of the year. But this Liberty team, if you didn't watch the Atlantic Sun tournament, this Liberty team is really good. And Mississippi State, I know that, they're from the SEC, and I actually found this statistic courtesy of Yahoo, which is that guard Nick Witherspoon, who's averaging 9.6 points per game, he was suspended in mid-February. Right now, Mississippi State is still 23-10. They've still done pretty well without him. But since his suspension in mid-February, Mississippi State has not beaten a tournament team. They haven't beaten a tournament team. They've only beaten up on weaker foes, like the Texas A&Ms of the world in the conference, and they lost in the SEC quarterfinals. They have not beaten according to the NCAA tournament, they haven't beaten a top 28 team, a top 68 team, I should say. They just haven't done it. And I don't think that Mississippi State will randomly be able to, figure it out without Nick Witherspoon playing. And Mississippi State is also a very pedestrian 1-5 straight up against top 25 teams. Was Liberty a top 25 team? No. But it shows that Mississippi State in these step-up spots has come up really short, especially since the suspension in mid-February. They do have some great players. Quindary Witherspoon averaging 18.2 points per game. He's a tremendous guard, and he's really good, and he shoots roughly 40% from three. And point guard Lamar Peters is also very solid from three. But this Liberty team is one of the most underrated defensive teams in the country. And they play defense extremely similarly to Virginia. And their defense this year, I know that the level of competition is relatively weaker considering the fact that the most toughest opponents they've faced in terms of conference play have been Lipscomb, as well as, Florida Gulf Coast is a household name, but they had a down year. But Liberty itself is giving up 60.76 points per game. And I really just don't think that Mississippi State will be able to generate as much offense as they're comfortable to play. Mississippi State likes to play a little bit more up-tempo, and Liberty is the exact opposite of that. And I feel like this game will kind of go down like the West Coast Conference Final. We're going to have Gonzaga, where there's a team that loves to play up-tempo. They love to score a lot of points. You have another team like St. Mary's or Liberty in this case who loves to slow the ball down, control the tempo, hold the ball for about 28 seconds, and force Mississippi State to actually run their offenses and to limit the transition points available. I'm going to state here that the Liberty Flames, their average possessions rank 346th in the country, and it has one of the slowest offenses in the entire tournament. But at the same point, they are also 12th in effective field goal percentage and 7th in two-point field goal percentage. And Liberty is also the 7th best free throw shooting team in the entire country. And as I mentioned before, with the Harvard and Penn game a couple days ago, free throws are huge. And there's nothing worse than seeing a team that you have money on miss the front end of a 1-and-1 and just give up free opportunities for points. I like Liberty in this game. I think that as a 12-5, as I actually see one of the questions in here is it true that the most common upset is the 5-12 matchup? And the answer is yes, statistically, in terms of a double-digit seed beating a single-digit seed. The 12-5 is usually the upset that happens at least once per tournament. Last year, it is important to mention that the 12 seed did go 0-4 against the 5. But in the past, it does seem like the 12 seed tends to get the best of the 5 seed at least once per tournament, if not twice. So if you're looking at the 5v12 in comparison to the 4v13 or the 3 versus the 14, odds are the 5-12 is usually more common than that. And it's actually perfect timing considering the fact that I'm actually picking a 12 seed to beat a 5 seed in this matchup with Liberty and Mississippi State. Liberty will make the free throws on the stretch. They're extremely efficient for a team that slows down the ball. They're pretty much a poor man's Virginia in this, and people won't talk about them because they're in the Atlantic Sun. But I think Liberty's going to win this game, and I will definitely have some Liberty money line tickets in my pocket. As of right now, the spread, Mississippi State is favored by 7 points, but it has come down to 6.5 currently at Pinnacle. So I know that money has started to come in on Liberty. I'm going to take the money line in this game. I think Mississippi State's going to be out of sorts, and I don't trust Mississippi State running a half-court offense the entire game for a team that has become so accustomed to playing an up-tempo style for the majority of their success this season. So I will be taking Liberty in that game in the first upset that we have here. Now we have the 4v13 matchup between Virginia Tech and St. Louis. I am not going to spend pretty much any time on this game. I watched St. Louis play against St. Bonaventure yesterday, and I was definitely not impressed. I know that they ended up coming back and winning, but Virginia Tech is favored by 10.5 points in this game, and I think it's definitely warranted, considering the fact that St. Louis just really can't score the ball. St. Louis is one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the entire country, shooting 352nd in three-point shooting, so I don't really trust them. Besides their senior guard, Javon Best, who's averaging 15.4 points per game, they don't really have much scoring. They're averaging 67 points per game. I don't think they're going to score enough points. They're 0-2 against top 25 teams. Virginia Tech, I think, is an extreme sleeper in this tournament. I think will make it to the Sweet 16. This team has been originally struggled without starting point guard Justin Robinson, who ended up getting injured. But they ended up rallying. They beat Duke without Zion. They looked really good late. They ended up losing to Florida State, an extremely close game in their conference tournament. And then shocking news came out yesterday, which is that Justin Robinson, their senior point guard who got injured, who missed about the last month, has officially been declared active for this tournament. So he might come out a little bit rusty early on, but Virginia Tech has already been rolling. Buzz Williams has done a great job with that program, and they had some high-quality wins. They played 9 games against the top 25 this season. They're 3-6 in those, but you have to play North Carolina, you have to play Duke, you have to play all those teams. So they've definitely challenged themselves in conference play naturally because the ACC, in my opinion, is the best conference. But Virginia Tech against St. Louis, there's a reason why Virginia Tech's favored by 10.5 points. I think they're going to kill this team. I think Virginia Tech will win this game by roughly 15 points, assuming that Robinson doesn't come out completely flat. In terms of over-under, It's at 126. I will lean to the under there because Virginia Tech plays extremely solid defense, and St. Louis is only averaging 67 points per game. I don't think St. Louis is going to pass 55 in this. I think Virginia Tech's going to win this game somewhere around the realm of 69-54, give or take. I like the under. I like Virginia Tech covering. But do I feel really confident backing a team in the first round by 10.5 points? Not particularly. But the line opened up at 10. It's up to 10.5. A lot of that probably has to do with the Robinson news. But I will be taking Virginia Tech to win this game handily over St. Louis in the 4v13 matchup. Just a reminder, if anybody of the people listening wants to ask more questions, I already got a question, which I believe I tried to answer the best way. If anyone else wants to know anything or focus on any matchups in particular, just let me know. Or if they want me to explain some logic I have so far any further, I'll be more than happy to do so. But I'm going to continue on that note. Now you have Maryland as the 6th seed versus one of the first 4 teams in between Belmont and Temple. Now, if you have watched my previous video, you already know who I like in this game in terms of Belmont and Temple. I already like Belmont. I've already put money on Belmont in this game. But I'm actually going to ask some questions here. Kansas State, I will get to in a second, Catholic, and I appreciate the question. I will get to that when I get into their region, which will be coming up next. Which plays I like enough to play myself? I am going to be playing Liberty Moneyline and the +7. I really think Liberty will beat Mississippi State. And the 12-5 matchup, as it is us, 18 had alluded to before, the 5-12 is a very common matchup for people to pick upsets. It went 0-4 last year, but overall, that's the 4th time that's happened since 1985. So I have to assume at least one 12 seed will beat a 5 seed this year. And I think Liberty definitely is the most talented 12 seed in the tournament. This team's really good. I will be having money on Liberty with the +7 as well as the money line in that game to address Phil's question. I also will be having some plays on some other games, including the Yale LSU game. I will be having a play on that. I will probably have a lean. Actually, no, I will end up putting money on the VCU UCF first half under because of VCU's inability to shoot the 3-point ball, as well as VCU's ability to play lockdown defense, and for Central Florida to play a relatively slow style of offense with Taco Fall in the middle as a premier shot blocker. That game should be in the 50s. I like the under in that one. But I'm going to continue moving forward here. I like Belmont, as I said yesterday in my video, against Temple. I think Belmont's just a significantly better team. The offensive efficiency, they're top 10 in pretty much every offensive category, and they're averaging over 87 points per game. Temple, with Rose and Alston, they're solid players, but they're extremely inefficient from the floor. Belmont's shooting roughly 50% from the floor in the season, where Temple's shooting roughly 43%. Belmont should get the job done. That was our pick yesterday to hopefully push our record to 9-3. So I'm going to be treating this as if Belmont is going to be playing Maryland. I think Belmont will beat Maryland. Mark Turgeon's a solid coach, but at the same point, this team always tends to underachieve against quality opponents. And Belmont has challenged themselves outside of conference play, particularly where they ended up beating UCLA on the road in the Pavilion. I know UCLA is having a down year, but the fact that they were willing to challenge themselves and play in a hostile environment in out-of-conference play definitely speaks volumes. They also lost to Purdue, but it was at Purdue. That game was actually competitive throughout, and it was single digits for the majority of that game. Belmont's a really solid team. I think that Maryland, they do have Bruno Fernando, who's averaging 13.7 points per game and 10.4 rebounds per game, which is important, assuming that Belmont center Nick Mazinski will not be able to play, who's been extremely solid this season. He did not play against Murray State in the conference championship game, but his status is uncertain. Money has come in on Belmont against Temple, so I have the assumption that he will be ready to go against Maryland in that game, assuming that they end up beating Temple. And I think Belmont overall is the better team. Maryland I've seen play, considering the fact that I go to a Big Ten school, so I've had the fortune of seeing Maryland play, whether it's on TV or live this year. Bruno Fernando's really good, and Anthony Cowan's a solid guard. Other than that, I don't really see much talent on this team. I don't think Maryland has much depth, and I don't really trust Mark Turgeon in the middle of an NCAA tournament. He hasn't really done much. They're 4-5 versus a top 25 team. They're solid, but Maryland has been significantly better in the Xfinity Center at home as opposed to on the road. They are not that good on the road. And Belmont this season against the spread is roughly 19-10 ATS. I think Belmont will get the job done. Belmont has some really great players. Belmont, I think they're the better coach team. I think they're the deeper team. I think that they are the better offensive team. And I think that they will turn the ball over less, as Maryland will only look to roughly 2 guys to carry the entire load offensively. Yes, Fernando's extremely solid, and yes, Cowan's very good. But outside those 2 guys, or if either of them get into foul trouble, Maryland is in some serious trouble, as they don't have much depth at all. And I think that it's also important to note that Maryland ranks 262nd in turnovers per possession. So this team is also a very sloppy bunch. And against such a team that has the offensive efficiency of Belmont, you definitely can't afford to be turning the ball over. So I will be taking Belmont. However, if Temple does upset Belmont, I will pick Maryland to beat Temple. I just think Temple's inefficiency offensively will come up to bite them. So Belmont wins against Temple. I'm taking Belmont. But if Temple beats Belmont, I'll be taking Maryland. And I'll be moving on from there. Next, we have LSU versus Yale in a 3-14 matchup. And some people might disagree with me here, but I will actually be taking the Yale Bulldogs to get the job done in this game against LSU in the first relative shocker of the tournament, considering the fact that Liberty is a 12 versus a 5. And right on cue, the scout asked me, how much will Will Wade's absence as head coach of LSU, or I should say former head coach of LSU, considering the fact that he's suspended, how much will it affect LSU? I think it affects them a ton. If you watch the SEC tournament, in that game they lost to Florida, Will Wade's absence was pretty much the main reason why they lost. And their interim coach also picked up a technical foul, and they ended up giving up a 6-point possession as they lost to Florida. And LSU itself, it was technical, yeah. It was brutal. And, I mean, it turned into a 6-point possession, which you can't allow to happen. I think Will Wade with this team is extremely solid, but you have to wonder about the chemistry of LSU right now. You've been spending your whole season hearing speeches from one guy, and you were talking about team unity, and pretty much every team shirt has the family logo, on their, warm-up gear and everything like that. And now the leader of the team is no longer there because of the fact that he allegedly paid players to come to the program. And overall, this Yale team is extremely underrated. I doubt anybody actually watched the Ivy League tournaments in the sense that they were actually considering it. But Yale dropped 97 points in their conference championship game against Harvard. And I know that Harvard isn't the same quality as LSU, of course, but Harvard plays a relatively slower style of play. And Yale scoring 97 points in that game. This Yale team is a tremendous offensive unit. I think this game's going over. The total is at roughly 160. I think the total should be at 165 or so. This game will be in the 80s. Both teams love to play up tempo. Yale is one of the most efficient teams offensively in the entire country. And LSU with a backup coach who probably isn't even worthy of being a starter, of being a head coach in college basketball right now. I don't really trust this team. And I don't really see – plus LSU also struggles dramatically shooting from the outside. Their leading three-point shooter in Tremont Williams is shooting just 33.3% from three-point range. So if your leading three-point shooter is only making a third of his threes, I don't really know how you're going to be able to keep up with this Yale team, which is averaging 81 points per game. They're 44th in offensive efficiency, and they've also been extremely healthy this entire season. And overall, I definitely think that this game will be played in the 170s. So my biggest play on this game would be the over, especially with LSU and their new interim coach. I don't really trust them, preparing a solid enough game plan to stop Yale offensively from being able to, get whatever they want. I think both teams will score in the 80s. Do I think that there's a strong probability that Yale will win this game? Probability is a little bit strong, considering the fact that, LSU is a 3 seed and Yale's a 14 seed. But I definitely think LSU is overrated without their head coach. I think that if Will Wade was not the coach for the majority of the season, LSU would be roughly a 7 seed. And in terms of rebounding, Yale's actually really good on the boards. And they're averaging roughly 39 rebounds per game, which is a lot for an Ivy team. So you have 38.9 rebounds per game versus LSU, who's averaging 38.8 rebounds per game. So people automatically think that LSU, will dominate on the boards, with the fact that LSU is, from the SEC, so they're automatically going to have the better athletes, and, the Ivy can't really compete in that regard to the physical brand of basketball. but Yale definitely can. And Yale actually averages more rebounds per game than LSU. I think LSU will play well offensively in the sense that they will score 80 points or so, but this game will be a track meet, and I think Yale will definitely score in the 80s in this game. Both teams are averaging 81 plus points per game. I'm taking Yale. I think that Yale, if you would do a correlated parlay between Yale and if you don't trust the money line, which is a solid payout, even if you take the plus 7.5, if you parlay the Yale plus 7.5 with the over 160 right now, I think that's free money based on the fact that if this game is going to go over, I think that Yale will cover the spread. Because there's no way that LSU is going to cover the 7.5 and that they're going to end up covering the total all by themselves. I don't see that. I think this game will be tough throughout. Money's already come in on Yale. I think if you're looking for a little bit of an upset or a team in the double digits that could make a potential run in this tournament, it could be Yale. But LSU, with the performance against Florida and the fact that Florida just completely outcoached them, LSU has more talent, and Tremont Waters is a very solid point guard, but LSU can't shoot, and right now they're without a head coach. And without your starter head coach, I don't really know how your chemistry is able to hold up in that situation, especially on a neutral court. So I will be taking the Yale Bulldogs in another upset with a 14 over a 3, and I will be taking Yale in this game versus LSU. Now the next game, we got Louisville versus Minnesota. The truth is, I don't think this game's going to matter too much in the long run because I think both these teams are severely flawed. Minnesota, led by Coach Pitino, I think Coach Pitino's over it, and I think that he's coasted off of Rick's legacy this entire time because I think he's underachieved in Minnesota for the talent that he has. Yes, Amir Kolf is extremely solid, but I don't really see this team's offense being able to pick it up against Louisville. Minnesota's only averaging roughly 70 points per game. They have weapons. They have no bench. They're ranked 303rd in bench minutes for Minnesota. And Louisville, for a team that has choked a lot of big leads, the main one, of course, being their blown double-digit lead against Duke in the middle of the season at home. Louisville is still led by Chris Mack. And people who might not remember Chris Mack, he was the Xavier coach for the last couple of years when Xavier would go on all these tournament runs. I think that, and Louisville is also the 17th best defensive team in terms of defensive efficiency, and they're 20th in opposing field goal percentage, opposing effective field goal percentage. So Louisville doesn't play much offense either, but Louisville's defense is extremely solid, and I think Minnesota will get into foul trouble in this game. So I like Louisville beating Minnesota. Minnesota wasn't even in a position to make the tournament until they beat Purdue in the conference tournament. I think Purdue's extremely overrated. Louisville's favored by 5 points, and that's a lot of points considering the fact that this is a 7 versus a 10 matchup. So I will be going with the Louisville Cardinals, who probably, if they did not blow as many bleeds as they did in the second half this season, would be in line for roughly a 5 seed. I think there's some value on Louisville, and I think Minnesota, before this past weekend, wasn't even in the tournament field. So I will be going with Louisville to get the job done against Minnesota. And the last game, you have Michigan State and Bradley. I'm not going to spend really any time on this game. Props to Bradley for that massive double-digit second-half comeback against Northern Iowa in their conference tournament. But Michigan State was a borderline 1 seed. They're a solid team. I know the last time they were a 2 seed of this caliber, they lost in the first round to Middle Tennessee State. But Bradley just can't score. That whole conference can't score. Cassius Winston is the best player on the court by far. Plus, Nick Ward is getting back into form, and Matt McQuaid is an extremely solid shooter. I think Matt McQuaid is going to be the next type of Kyle Korver guy in the league. I think he's going to be an absolute marksman from the three-point line in the NBA when he ends up leaving college. So I will be going with Michigan State. In terms of the spreads, if I was leaning in any direction in this game, I would probably lean to the under 133.5. Money's come in on the over. But realistically, if that game's going over, Michigan State's going to have to score at least 80. And I know that Michigan State has the offensive capability of scoring 80, but Bradley is just so slow in terms of offensive tempo that I don't know how Michigan State's going to have enough possessions to even get to 80 points. Bradley loves to just hold the ball. They don't make many shots. Bradley in 2-point attempts, they convert just 46.7% of them, which ranks 302nd in the nation. And this team loves to hold the ball. This team is 300th in tempo. This game, I'd have to lean under. I think Bradley's going to score roughly 50 points in this game. I can't go with the over. I have to assume that Bradley's going to struggle, and I think Michigan State will take out the starters with about 5 minutes left in this game. This game should be a blowout. I would not be surprised if this game turns into like a 75-52 type of game, where this game will go under. Michigan State will roll. They'll pull the starters. Everyone will take a nap in the second half. And it's very tough to pick overs in these games between blowouts because, Michigan State has their sights set on they have higher aspirations than blowing out Bradley, and they'd rather rest their players, especially with the injury to one of their players yesterday against Michigan. Based on that, I would not be surprised to see Tom Izzo have a little bit of a quick trigger when it comes to taking players out in garbage time, with the fear of having players get injured when you're in the middle of a potential tournament run. So I like the under in that Michigan State Bradley game. That's a lean. I'm not as confident on that as I am with the Yale LSU game. But in terms of that under, Phil, I like it. I think that's under is going to be a solid play, but I feel more confident about the LSU Yale total in that game, and I feel more confident about the VCU versus UCF under in that game. I like the under Michigan State Bradley, but Michigan State could end up putting up a ton of points, and Michigan State does have superior athletes. I think that game will go under with Michigan State Bradley, but the last thing you really want to worry about is people like Cassius Winston being guarded by a bunch of inferior athletes, where Cassius Winston can drop 30 if he wants all by himself. Plus, Michigan State could force a lot of turnovers, and that game could get a little bit more up-tempo. Michigan State loves to play with fast tempo, and Bradley does not. So I like the under in there. But if Bradley is unable to match up against Michigan State to such a degree, Michigan State could put up 85. And then you're looking at an over-under 130-something where one of the teams is 85 points. So I like the under. I will probably put a little bit of money on that. But in terms of totals, my most confident play on totals is going to be the LSU and Yale over. I think that game's going to have at least 170 points. I think that game's going to be a track meet. That game's going to be close throughout. I expect a lot of fouls in that one. So that's my most confident total in that game. But Michigan State will win that. Now I'm going to be moving on to the other side with the South, with Virginia side. Virginia versus Gardner-Webb. I'm spending no time on this. I'm taking Virginia. I mean, the odds of a 1 seed losing to a 16 seed in back-to-back years. The fact that Virginia lost to UMBC last year and DeAndre Hunter is finally healthy, they're not going to look past anybody. Virginia is in a make-or-break year where they're kind of in the Villanova range, where Villanova won their first title with Jenkins with that game-winning shot, where this team has underachieved so dramatically in the tournament that people immediately write them off as soon as they see the name Virginia. And you know that in most bracket pools, Virginia is a 1 seed, so they're a top 3 team in all of college basketball. But if in any bracket pool, I'd say that you'd only have a handful of people, if that would even take Virginia to win the whole thing, based on the notion that they're always going to choke. I think Virginia's going to kill Gardner-Webb, and I think Virginia's going to win this game handily, but I'm not going to touch it. And It Is Us says that, well, I actually just covered that, so I can cover Michigan State. Because, no, It Is Us. It's fine. I just covered that region, so I'll just mention it briefly. They will have a chip on their shoulder. Michigan State definitely got the raw end of the deal, considering the fact that they thought they were the 1 seed, and instead of being a 1 seed, they were a 2 seed, and they were put in the same side as Duke. But I think that goes to my point, where Michigan State might want to prove a point, but that's in the long run. Michigan State knows that this team is capable of potentially upsetting Duke. So I don't think they really care about running the score up on Bradley. They might try to make a point later on, but as a 2 seed against a 15, Michigan State will make the point known in the first half or so. They will be up double digits pretty much the entirety of this game. So I think Michigan State will be up by 20 or 25 with maybe 6 minutes left. And at that point, you have to assume Coach Izzo is going to bench everybody, because there's no reason for him to keep anybody in, especially with the injury to Aarons as well as the injury to Langford earlier this year. The last thing that Tom Izzo wants to do is force a player to continue playing while the team already has the game won. So I think Michigan State will try to make some points known in the long run. I think they're going to go on a pretty good run. It was a great game between Michigan and Michigan State. It's actually kind of funny that Michigan State won all 3 games against Michigan in similar fashion, where they were trailing pretty much by double digits in each of those games in the second half, and then Michigan's offense ran out of gas. That's actually a reason why I do not like Michigan in this tournament, which I will get to in a little bit. But in terms of the Michigan State, just to backtrack, I think Izzo's going to start benching people early based on the fact that some of their key players have gotten injured throughout the season. So that's why I'm a little bit cautious when it's going to come to laying big numbers with Michigan State. But overall, well, listen. It is us. I'm sorry there. But at the same point, your team did blow a double-digit lead in each of those 3 games against Michigan State. Your team is extremely solid defensively, and I still think that Beilein is the most underrated coach in all of college basketball somehow, even though he's extremely elite, but nobody really talks about him, like, ever, because he doesn't play an entertaining style of basketball. Same thing with Tony Bennett. People don't really like to watch defense. They prefer to, see these up-tempo style of offense like the Dukes and the Carolinas of the world. But Beilein is a tremendous coach. Michigan has absolutely – they don't have much of a bench at all. Plus, their free throw shooting, Matthews has improved. But anytime you have a starting guard who's shooting roughly 60% from the foul line, I don't really trust that at all in these close games. And I know that Michigan does have some great players, specifically with Jordan Poole. Poole is tremendous. And Michigan is definitely going to be riding him for the next couple of years, especially after his ridiculous 3-point game winner against Houston last year. Poole's a great player. I think Igor's very solid in the paint. But overall, the lack of free throw shooting will concern me long-term for Michigan, but I'm going to get to that in a second. And the Gonzaga Syracuse, I will get to that as soon as I get to that side of the bracket, because I do think Syracuse will be playing Gonzaga in the second round. And that might be an upset pick. It might not be, but you can stay tuned and we will find out together. But moving forward, I like Mississippi to beat Oklahoma. Am I the only one who was – maybe this is just me. Was I the only one who was shocked that Oklahoma got a 9 seed? I mean, you go in throughout the entire season, they were ranked for the majority of the year. They finished the conference 7-11. They're 2-6 against top 25 teams. And they lose in the first round of their conference tournament to West Virginia. So my question is, based on all that, how did Oklahoma get a 9 seed? I get they should be in the tournament. I'm not arguing they shouldn't be in the tournament, but they should at least be a 10 seed. I don't see how the 9 seed makes any sense. It's probably because of the fact that they play in the Big 12, which is, historically known as having a high amount of prestige. I think the Big 12 is the most overrated conference this entire season, and I think pretty much all the teams in the Big 12 aren't really that good in comparison to other conferences. So I don't really trust Oklahoma. I look to fade the Big 12 for the majority of this tournament because I don't think the Big 12 is that good. And your best team in the Big 12 is Iowa State for the most part because they won the conference tournament. Like, okay, that's fine. Texas Tech's also is a really solid team, but they can't score. Kansas State's a solid team. They can't score either. Kansas has been awful all year in comparison after they have a Buki injury and Vic ditched the program. I don't really trust anybody in that conference. And I think Mississippi in the SEC, Mississippi has been really solid this year. And overall, I like this team. They ended up blowing a big lead in the SEC tournament to Alabama, but I think Ole Miss is the deeper team. I think they're the more consistent team. And I also like the fact that Ole Miss is a tremendous three-point shooting team. So I think that Ole Miss will be able to play well in this game. And I don't think that Oklahoma is worthy of being a 9 seed. So I immediately think that they're overrated in this game. And Oklahoma is a 2-point underdog in this game. So I think that's completely warranted. I like Ole Miss getting the job done in this game. So I will be taking Ole Miss. Now moving on, we'll be looking at, and actually as I look at the clock right now, we've already been in for 38 minutes and I haven't even gone through half the bracket. So this might be a little bit longer than an hour if any of you want to bear with me and stay for the rest of this. I know last year I did it and I overdid it and ended up turning into about an hour and a half. But I did pick Villanova to win the championship last year, so I have some type of credibility on that. And if you need proof of that, it's linked to my actual YouTube channel, which I don't really use anymore because I've been working with StatSalt.com now. But back in the day last year, I ended up publishing my entire live stream of the tournament, and I got the winner correct. And I finished in the 92nd percentile of ESPN's tournament challenge last year. So I'm looking to build on that and to continue that type of success in the future. But I'm going to continue going here. We got our next matchup between Wisconsin and Oregon. Now, this game, as of right now, is a 5-12. Looks like, an immediate upset. If you think about it, you have one team that won the Pac-12 tournament. They're coming in on a roll. Plus, you have Altman, who's a tremendous coach. Then you have Wisconsin, a team that can't score, a team that can't shoot free throws, a team which has an overrated coach and Coach Guard. And I might sound a little bit bitter, but it's also because I go to Wisconsin. So I've seen this team play multiple times. I've broadcasted this team play multiple times. Wisconsin is definitely the worst 5 seed in this entire tournament, and that's not even a debate. And I even said before this season on my radio show on campus, I said that I would pick Wisconsin. This was back in October. I said Wisconsin would be a 5 seed and they would lose in the second round. That was my prediction. I have proof of that. I've said it months ago. This team is not any good, but I will give Wisconsin props because of the fact that Ethan Happ is definitely going to be the best player on the court in one of his last college games of his career. But Khalil Iverson, I've given him a lot of issues throughout his entire college career as being a relatively overrated player. He's actually come into his own offensively, and his athleticism, I think, could give Oregon some serious problems as a small power forward or as a large small forward. And Reavers is also good. Wisconsin has a lot of height. And I think that there's a reason why Wisconsin is favored in this game. Oregon loves to thrive on chaos, and they love to force teams into turnovers. And Wisconsin really doesn't turn the ball over because of their very slow tempo style of play. Oregon will be a very popular pick to be a 12-5 upset. But Wisconsin's favored by 1. And I really think Wisconsin will win this game for me. Wisconsin tends to struggle in the NCAA tournament, but they do really well typically in the first couple of rounds, where they will get to usually the round of 32 or the Sweet 16, and then they'll choke late. Like, for example, the Notre Dame game a couple of years ago or the Florida game where Kioza hit that floater 3-pointer in overtime where they should have won. Either or, Wisconsin, I think, is the more fundamentally sound team versus Oregon. Oregon did a really good job, but this game, there's a reason why this total is at 116.5, or it was in the beginning. It's up to 118 now, but this game won't have many points, and I think Wisconsin with Ethan Happ, I expect Happ to dominate in the post, and I think Wisconsin will get the job done against Oregon. Will I be shocked if Oregon wins this game? No, not by any means, but I think that Wisconsin will win this game, and I think that the fact that you have a Pac-12, I think the Pac-12 is awful. But the fact that you have a conference tournament champion going up against a team that got absolutely destroyed in their conference tournament to Michigan State, and yet the team that got destroyed in the conference tournament is favored in this game versus one of the hottest teams in the country. I think that's a potential red flag, and I think a lot of people will take Oregon, but I like Wisconsin to win this game. And back to my job. Yeah, the Scout, yes, you can. I might be live streaming again in the future just to cover some March Madness bets. I will be doing my signature, play of the day kind of thing in the future. But since there are so many games, I could potentially double up and do a longer video or just some live stream on my initial impressions of the first few rounds. So if you have to go to work, you can do that. I'm not going to try to get you fired if you want. You might make more money staying here, but yeah, you can take care of what you need to take care of. And worst case is you can just watch it later. But overall, yeah, good luck at work, Scout. I'll see you around. But overall, I think that Big Ten respect. In the case of the Pac-12, no, okay, so I'll rephrase that. The Pac-12 only has 2 teams in the entire tournament between the Pac-12 with Oregon and Washington. But I think we can agree that out of the Power 5 conferences, the Pac-12 was definitely the worst conference in pretty much in the country. That whole conference was terrible. And they would have only gotten 1 team in unless Oregon or any other team ran the table in the conference tournament. Actually, no, they got 3 in technically, with Arizona State being in the last 4 in. I don't even know if that was warranted. But, we'll see. They play St. John's in a play-in game. I don't really think the Pac-12 is any good. And Big Ten respect, I actually really dislike the Big Ten in this tournament. The Big Ten got the most teams in. I think the Big Ten is highly overrated. I think Michigan State's definitely the best team in the conference. I think Michigan has the ability to make a run, but I question their scoring ability. Other than that, I just see a bunch of mediocre teams. I think Wisconsin's overrated as a 5. I think Purdue's really overrated as a 3. I think Maryland's overrated as a 6. I think Minnesota's overrated. I don't even know if they should be in the tournament. I think Ohio State shouldn't even be in the tournament in the first place. And I really just don't like the Big Ten in this tournament. I think that the majority of their teams will lose early on. I don't think that they're very good. I've watched a decent amount of Big Ten basketball all year because I go to a Big Ten school. And I don't really think the conference is that good. I think the conference is better than the Pac-12, but that's really saying nothing. I think Purdue is going to be a bust, if I'm being honest, Philly Joe. It seems like Painter always does a good job with the regular season. They always seem to choke in the tournament, and I'm not just even mentioning the loss to Little Rock a couple years ago. They did make a good run against Texas Tech last year, where they lost in what I believe was the Sweet 16. But Purdue shouldn't be a 3. I've seen them play. They're great at home. They are terrible away from home this entire season, and they pretty much have one player in Carson Edwards. And other than that, I mean, I know Harms is pretty good in the paint, but they rely too much on three-pointers, they rely too much on one guy. And I don't think Purdue is going to do well this season. I think the whole Big Ten's overrated. I think Wisconsin being favored in this game is a little bit of a question mark. Michigan does have a decent region, which is why I said that I think Michigan, even though Michigan State's the better team, I think Michigan has the best chance of making the Final Four of any of the Big Ten teams because of their respective region. Because I don't think Michigan State's going to beat Duke. I don't really think anybody's going to beat Duke. I think Duke on any given day is by far the best team in the country, and it's not even close. With Zion healthy and with Barrett and with Reddish. I do think Barrett and Reddish, in terms of pro skill, are a little bit overrated. But in terms of college play, I mean, you have 3 of the top 5 picks on one team. So Michigan State's a good team, but I don't think they're that good to beat Duke. But Michigan does have an easy region. I don't like their offense, but their defense is tremendous, and I think that they have a top 3 coach in the entire tournament. So I will be going into that. In terms of the question for Master with Kentucky, UNC, Elite 8, I'm just going to spoil that one. Yes, I do think Kentucky will be playing North Carolina in the Elite 8. I think both teams are too talented. Both teams could lose due to inconsistency, but in terms of talent, especially with Kentucky getting Reed Travis back, I think Kentucky will get there. I think North Carolina will get there as well. Utah State is a solid team. I think that they could. Let me know when you get a premium service. I will let you know. Honestly, I don't know if I'll ever want to actually do a premium service. I kind of like giving away picks for free. And the worst thing that I can do is, start charging people for my opinions on games. It's very common on YouTube and particularly in Twitter with sports betting, where you have people that actually charge people money to get picks. I do this for fun. And the last thing I want to do is take people's hard-earned money and it's kind of like it's a stockbroker strategy where I tell you I have all the answers and then, you give me money and I'll give you answers that I don't really know if they're going to be true or not. I'm giving leans because I enjoy giving them. And I give all my picks for free anyway on statsalt.com. So honestly, would I like to make money making picks? I mean, of course, I'm not going to say no to money, but at the same point, I don't think it's really warranted. I like giving away picks for free. I like writing for the company at statsalt.com where I provide my picks, for free online anyway, and I provide them on YouTube for free. So down the road, I don't know, like maybe, but overall, I like giving away picks for free, and I'm going to continue doing that on YouTube as long as I, like to. But question for Joe, I'm not as high as many on Virginia. See, a lot of people are never high on Virginia, and that's for the same reason. Because Tony Bennett and his style, Virginia's built to win games pretty much one way, which is if we hold you less than 65 points per game, we're going to win. That's pretty much the only way Virginia wins. Virginia against some really bad teams might score 90 against like a Georgia Tech of the world or any of those teams in conference play. In the tournament, though, that's why they always lose. They used to always lose to Michigan State, and even that one year they got killed by Florida. Virginia's offense will not score enough points, and that's what happened with Florida State in the conference tournament, where they gave up more than 65 points in that game, and Florida State just simply held Virginia to roughly 60, and they won. So I can understand why people don't like Virginia, but I think Virginia's region is just so easy that if there was 1 year for them to actually get – if there was 1 year for Virginia to actually get to the Final Four, with the exception of that double-digit blown lead against Syracuse in the Elite 8 that 1 year, with Malachi Richardson going off in the second half, yeah, I agree that Virginia, when they get sped up, has problems, which is exactly what Syracuse did a couple years ago with the Malcolm Brogdon team. Virginia this season, though, has a lot of weapons, and people don't like them last year, but they forget that DeAndre Hunter was injured. They forgot that DeAndre Hunter was injured for Virginia last year, and he's one of the best players on that entire team. I like Virginia this season. I think they will make a run, but that's mostly just because if there was a year for Virginia to make a run, it would have to be this year. because their region, I know Tennessee's a very solid team, but Tennessee goes through a lot of lapses, and I don't really know if I can trust that team consistently. Virginia, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get the best defensive team in the country. You're going to get Kyle Guy, who's a tremendous, fundamentally sound player who I think is going to make it to the pros. And then you also have DeAndre Hunter in there. I like that team. I think Virginia, if there was 1 year for them to make a serious run, it would be this year. So I will be going with Virginia to make the Final Four because of the fact that everybody else is going to pick Tennessee. Tennessee is going to be the most popular to-pick to probably make it to the Final Four in most people's brackets because they beat Kentucky multiple times and everything like that. But I'm going to be taking Virginia. And now, Duke did play great defense against Florida State. It's different, though, because last year they played zone defense single-handedly because Marvin Bagley could not guard anybody. So they had to go zone defense because Marvin Bagley was the biggest waste of space when it came to defense last season. So Coach K had to try something. So back at man, they've done a really good job. Plus, Zion's a great rim protector, blocks a lot of shots. I like it. But that's true. I think Houston could have won on a serious run. They didn't get it. So I think Philly, Joe, you can agree with me, though, that Virginia, based on their region alone, probably has, I'd say, the easiest path to the Final Four out of their respective region. I think Virginia, you have Tennessee, Purdue, and Kansas State. I think that Virginia definitely got the best deal on that to make the Final Four in their region. So I like Virginia to make a run. I'm going to keep going through the picks. I'm probably going to take less time on these picks going forward because it's starting to approach an hour, and we're not even past the majority of the first round. I could break it up into multiple videos, but there's no point because everyone's bracket's going to be due in like a day or two anyway. But I'm going to keep it going. So I like Wisconsin to beat Oregon. Kansas State and UC Irvine. This game's really tricky. A lot of people like Irvine. A lot of people like by the way, when you say Will Wade, I'm assuming you mean Dean Wade for Kansas State scout. I'm assuming you mean Dean Wade there for Kansas State. And that's actually what I was going to say. I think that Kansas State's success comes down to Dean Wade. No, it's fine, Scout. I was just making sure because I was just making sure we're talking about the same, making sure we're on the same page. Because I wasn't sure if you meant the LSU coach, and it's fine. So Dean Wade is, in my opinion, the best player on Kansas State. And I personally think he will play. And I think that Kansas State simply decided to hold him out. I think they could have played him if they wanted to in the conference tournament, but they knew the NCAA tournament was more important. I think he will play. If he doesn't, then Irvine's definitely in position to get an upset. Irvine's a solid team, 30-5, and they're 15-1 in conference play. But the Big West overall this season was not that great. But Kansas State, they're 4-3 against top 25 teams, and they still went 14-4 in conference play in the regular season. So I like this team a lot. Dean Wade's really good. They also have a very, very good sixth man in Diarra. Not to mention the fact that they also have Barry Brown Jr. They're a terrible free throw shooting team, though. They only shoot 66% from the line, but they have 3 senior starters. I think that's really important. People like Irvine in this game. I think that if Dean Wade plays, Kansas State will win this game. If Dean Wade plays, I think that's a given. Money's already come in on UC Irvine. Kansas State was favored by 5.5. It's at 4.5 now. The over-under's at 120. If Dean Wade does not play, I don't know how I don't take the under in this game, or the first half under at least. With Dean Wade not playing, I think, okay, I'll be clear. If Dean Wade doesn't play, I still think Kansas State will win this game. The fact that they have 3 senior starters, I think, is extremely important. And this team did go to the Elite Eight. I forgot how far they went last year. I want to say the Elite Eight, and they ended up losing to Loyola Chicago. I do remember they beat Kentucky last year, and they ended up they got lucky because they played a UMBC. Oh, okay. Well, UC Irvine is also experienced, but I think we can agree, though, that Kansas State has played significantly more difficult opponents, naturally being from the Big 12. And sharing a regular season, conference title in there is extremely important. UC Irvine has experience, but they don't have tournament experience. And I think there's a difference between the two, where senior starting means one thing because of the fact that they've played a lot of games. But there's a difference between playing a lot of games together and playing a lot of NCAA tournament games together. And Philly Joe, I think that that's the major difference between the teams, where Kansas State made the Elite Eight last year with 3 starters. Oh, it's a good test for a 13 against the 4. And I think that's why people will like to take Irvine in this game. In terms of betting, there's no way I'm laying 4.5 with Kansas State. There's no way I can do it, because in the fact that Kansas State doesn't score enough points, the free throw shooting is terrible, and Dean Wade is also injured. So, Philly Joel, I agree with you on that for a 13v4, it is definitely going to be a popular upset pick. But Kansas State made the Elite Eight last year. They brought the majority of the team back from last season. I think Kansas State is poised to make another potential run in this tournament. And UC Irvine's good. This game will be in the 60s. There's a reason why this total was in the 118s early on. But Kansas State always does well in the tournament. And UC Irvine hasn't been there since, I believe, Mamadou N'Diaye went to college there, and they lost in the first round to Louisville, I believe. And I'm still salty about that because I had UC Irvine winning that game behind 7'6" Mamadou N'Diaye, but that's way back in the day. So UC Irvine has experience. They don't have NCAA tournament experience. And Kansas State has 3 players from last year's Elite Eight team that came back as seniors in their starting lineup. So I think Kansas State will win this game. If Dean Wade's not playing, I lean to the under. But overall, 120 is an extremely low number. No way I'm laying the spread with Kansas State. But I think Kansas State will beat UC Irvine. I wouldn't really fall for that trap. Is it possible that UC Irvine will win? Of course, anything's possible. But I think Kansas State, as being the 18th ranked team in the country, I will take Kansas State in that game. Now, moving on, we'll be talking about Villanova versus St. Mary's. Now, I watched the entire St. Mary's Big West game WCC conference title game, because before Zion came back, assuming Zion was not 100%, I had Gonzaga winning the championship. I thought Gonzaga was the second best team in the country before Zion. I thought Gonzaga was the best team in the country when Zion was not playing. But after that conference tournament game against St. Mary's, a part of me, I think this is the worst matchup for St. Mary's possible. You have a team that loves to slow the ball down. They thrive against teams that love to play up-tempo because they control, kind of like what Virginia does, kind of like what I said Liberty would do against Mississippi State. They love to hold the ball for an eternity and then shoot it with 2 seconds on the shot clock, send all 5 guys back on defense, and force you to spend roughly 25 seconds finding your own shot. And Villanova, last year when they had Arcidiacono and all these other people, I agree. I think Villanova's too physical, and I think Villanova loves to also play a slower style of play. So I think St. Mary's, I love them to make a potential run before the bracket came out. But once the bracket came out, there's no way I can't go Villanova here. Jay Wright, I know that he's underachieved in some tournaments and he's won the championships in others, and they tend to go big or go home in these type of tournaments. Well, there's really no middle ground. They'll either go on a run or they'll lose immediately. But St. Mary's is good. They're a solid team. Crabb's a solid player. I mean, Ford's also a really good player. I watched them play. I just feel like St. Mary's played the perfect game against Gonzaga, that I think they're overvalued. I think people will only look at the fact they beat Gonzaga and immediately assume St. Mary's is poised to make a serious run. I thought they put everything they had into that for that emotional win. And Villanova quietly also won their conference tournament. So it's not like Villanova's coming into this on a slump either. I think Villanova will win this game. I think they'll dominate on the boards. I think that St. Mary's is a very solid team. Props to them for getting in. But overall, I mean, I just don't. It is important to mention that St. Mary's is 12th nationally in defensive rebounding rate, but it's also because they play the WCC. So if you're really out rebounding Pepperdine and Pacific and Santa Clara, of course your numbers are going to be inflated. That's why people don't like Gonzaga in most tournaments either. Villanova's played the harder schedule. They played well as of late. I think Pascal's going to play well. I think that Villanova simply just has too many weapons offensively. I think they're the better coach team. I think that Gillespie's a very solid player as well. And I also think that Booth is a great player. And Villanova will hit their 3-pointers, in my opinion. So I personally like Villanova to get the job done. In terms of spreads, do I have any thoughts on the spread in that game? No. I don't. Just because I pick Villanova to beat St. Mary's doesn't mean I trust Villanova. I don't trust Villanova in the long run of this tournament, but I think this is a perfect first-round matchup for them. So I think Villanova will win in the first round against St. Mary's. But do I trust Villanova laying the 5.5? No. St. Mary's are going to control St. Mary's will control itself, the tempo. This game will be extremely slow. If I had to pick a way to lean this game, 130.5 is way too high of a total for me between these two teams as we reach the hour mark on the show. I think what I'm going to be doing, by the way, is I think I'm going to do a live stream for the first round, and then I'll do the rest of the tournament tomorrow in a separate live stream, because I think that this, or actually, I might just do it later, but I feel like going 3 hours straight probably isn't the best way to go about it. So I will be breaking it down into two parts. I'll be doing the first round, and then I'll be doing the rest of the tournament in another video that I will upload either tonight or tomorrow. I think that makes more sense logistically. But I think I like the under in this Villanova-St. Mary's game a lot. I think St. Mary's, the only way they're going to win this game is if they limit Villanova to less than 70 points. I think if Villanova reaches 65 or so, this game's over. And I think Villanova will reach roughly 60-something. But I don't see how St. Mary's is going to score more than 60 points in this game. St. Mary's won against Gonzaga. Gonzaga only scored 47 points in that game. And yes, St. Mary's played great defense. But Villanova also loves to chew the entire shot clock. And St. Mary's loves to chew the entire shot clock. I don't see how this game goes into the half and is suddenly like 35. This game, one of these teams should be in the 20s at halftime. I don't see how these type of points will be scored. And St. Mary's isn't built to play an up-tempo style of play when they're trailing. They only play the game one way. So I have to like the under 130.5 in this game between Villanova and St. Mary's. And I'll be leaning to the under in that game as my best play on that respective game as opposed to relying on the spreads. But moving on, we have Purdue versus Old Dominion. Now, this is going to shock some people because I'm going to say it right now. I like Old Dominion winning this game. Yeah, correct. Villanova never runs out, even with breakouts. And St. Mary's is guaranteed to hold the ball at least 25 seconds in every shot clock. So I like the under in that Villanova-St. Mary's game. Money has come in on the over early on, but realistically, the public tends to just bet the overs in all these games as they drunkenly watch the games in the casinos, just rooting for points because nobody wants to root for unders even though they're the right side. I don't see how Villanova-St. Mary's doesn't end up in the 120s or the 110s. I think there's no way this game's reaching 130. I like the under in it. I think this game is poised for an under. You might end up, the big issue is the desperation fouling at the end, which could come back to bite people. So that's why I typically like to bet first half unders as opposed to full game unders. Because one, you get the full-time running clock, even on made baskets in the last minute. So if a team takes 9 years to inbound the ball, you just profit from those extra 10 seconds they take to inbound the ball. And two, regardless of the score, you will not have fouls late on purpose, and teams will hold the ball for the final shot. So even if a team's trailing in the first half, they will hold the ball for the last shot, and they will just chuck up a terrible shot at the end of the shot clock just to get the last shot on principle alone. So I like the first half under. I would take the first half under with St. Mary's and Villanova, and I'm confident in that play. But between Old Dominion and Purdue, in terms of spreads, this is my most shocking upset. I am going to be taking Old Dominion. And Old Dominion right now is a 13-point underdog, and a lot of money's coming on Purdue. But this comes back to my Big Ten thoughts. I really just dislike this Purdue team. I've watched them all year. I had money on them when they beat Iowa a while back. I've had money on them throughout the year because of the fact that no Big Ten team is actually good on the road, including Michigan. Pretty much all Big Ten teams, with the exception of maybe Michigan State, are all atrocious away from home. I don't trust Purdue in this neutral site game. I really don't. Old Dominion winning the Conference USA, really solid team defensively in particular. They're really good defensively, as they only give up 60.8 points per game. Purdue loves to play a relatively up-tempo style of play with Carson Edwards and Ryan Klein and Matt Harms, who's 7'3". They don't commit many turnovers. They have a solid defense. But overall, this game will be slow to a crawl. Old Dominion loves to hold the ball. They love to limit teams in transition. Do I like Old Dominion to win outright? I will have Old Dominion winning outright in my bracket. I think that you're better off taking the 13 points. I think there's no way that Purdue should be favored by this many points. I think that that's definitely a really safe play with Old Dominion plus 13. Now, the reason why people like Purdue is because Purdue has more offensive weapons, and they have better height with Harms at 7'3". So that's why people like them. But Correct. It's national Big Ten love, and I think, Philly Joe, you can agree with me that the Big Ten itself, in my opinion, is one of the most overrated conferences in the league this season. And Purdue, as of right now, is being ranked the third best team in the Big Ten, according to rankings, with Michigan and Michigan State. But Purdue, I don't really know, besides Carson Edwards, who I trust to create their own shot. Because Klein comes off screens exclusively. He's an exclusive screen three-point shooter. Besides that, Carson Edwards averages 23 points per game. I get it. Solid team. They lost to Minnesota in their conference tournament. They didn't look good at all. And if you just watch them play, I just don't see it. Klein comes off screens, he's a good three-point shooter. Edwards is a very high volume shooter. Edwards is a great player, but if your best player is shooting roughly 38% from the floor and he's chucking up 15-plus shots a game, I don't know how that's a recipe for success. Edwards is a high-volume shooter. He's the kind of guy who can get you 40 on a great day, but he's an eyesore some of the time, where he will go for 20 points, but he'll take 22 shots, or he'll take 25 shots, and you know that he's the only person on this team who can actually create their own looks. Harm's averaging 9 points per game. Pretty good player. Overall, though, Purdue doesn't have much of a bench at all. They run a lot of guys, but they don't score a lot on the bench. And I think this game will be slow to a crawl. I think Old Dominion will control the pace. Purdue is capable of winning these defensive shootouts. I mean, defensive slugfests, I should say. That's kind of an oxymoron, defensive shootouts. I mean, I can see this game being played similarly to the way Purdue beat Indiana, where this game turns into a 48-46 type of, rock fest where neither team can get anything going offensively. Do I think it'll be to that extreme? No. But I think this game will be decided in the 50s. I love the under in this game. I think that Purdue with their defensive style of play and Old Dominion with the fact that they play an elite level of defense and they love to slow the ball down. 129 is way too high of a total for me. That involves they think that Purdue's going to get into the 70s. And based on the projections, that means that Purdue's going to win this game like 71-58. And I just don't see that happening. I don't see Purdue scoring 71 points. I don't see it. I think this game will be in the 50s or in the 60s. And based on that, there's no way that Purdue's going to cover 13 points in a game where they only score 60 points. There's no way that that's going to happen. I think for a correlated parlay, I'm a big fan of Old Dominion plus the 13 parlayed with the under. I think that makes a lot of sense. Because if Old Dominion is going to keep this game close at all, this game's going to go under. Because Old Dominion doesn't have enough points, doesn't have enough scoring to keep up with Purdue. This is solely based on tempo and just fundamentals. Where Old Dominion has a couple of players who can score. They have a little bit more depth in terms of the scoring aspect. But Purdue relies on one guy in Carson Edwards to create his own shot, and he shoots 38% from the floor. So I think Purdue is going to play terribly. I think that Purdue with Matt Painter has underachieved in the tournament in recent years. They did make it to the Sweet 16 against Texas Tech, but in past years they did choke. Purdue has the rebounding edge. They do, because you have Harms who's 7'3". But, Philly Joe, let me ask you a question. Do you think that Old Dominion – do you think Purdue is a good enough team to be laying 13 points in this game to Old Dominion? There's no way that I could assume that in any game Purdue would be worthy of laying 13 points. I don't see it. I think Old Dominion plus 13 is a very solid play. I think people are on Purdue because you have some squares who look at the board and say, Old Dominion, I never heard of this team, and Purdue's in the Big Ten, so I'm picking Purdue. I don't see it. I agree. I think it should be around 5 or 6, if not a little bit more, maybe 7, maybe 6.5. I think that Old Dominion plus 13 has one of the best values in terms of spreads. In terms of the actual payout, okay, well, strong enough to play straight, tease, or parlay. Scout, the way that I would answer that is that I'm a big fan of playing the plus 13 straight on Old Dominion. That would be like my lock of the game. However, if you wanted a little bit extra money, I would if your book allows you to parlay totals and spreads, I would take the Old Dominion plus 13 and I would parlay it with the under in this game. Because there's only one way that Purdue's going to cover this number, and if Purdue covers this number, this game's going to go over. Purdue, if they win this game, will score more than 70 points, and this game will go over the posted total. But if Old Dominion keeps it to within 13, which they should, I will be going with the under because of the fact that I don't think Purdue's going to score more than 60 points. I think this game will be in the high 50s. I could see this game being like 59-58. I think this game's going to be really close. Do I think Old Dominion will win outright? I personally do. Even if they don't, this game will be within single digits, in my opinion, for the entirety of this game. I don't see how Purdue's going to blow this game open. In terms of what I'm going to do for this game, I will definitely first half under I do like. I do like the first half under, but I'm a little bit more concerned with the first half under in this game, just based on the fact that Purdue is such a volatile shooting team that they could come out shooting extremely well, and then it just won't sustain long term. Plus, you have to wonder if the moment itself might be a little bit too big for Old Dominion. But I actually like Old Dominion for another reason. It depends if people buy into sentimental stuff, because that's not really anything you can handicap for, but some teams tend to get an emotional edge from specific, events throughout the season, or, throughout something that a player or a coach is going through. I think it's going to play a factor. Old Dominion's head coach, if you don't know this, and I mean, it's not really basketball related, but at the same point, it definitely will provide a spark for motivation for the team. Old Dominion's coach, if you didn't know this, actually has cancer. And he has been coaching the last couple of months with, I believe, stage 2 cancer. And there was a video of him on Twitter with him as soon as they won the conference tournament. He broke down in tears. The whole team surrounded him. They were all over him. They were celebrating with him and all this other stuff. I know that that's something you can't really cap because you don't know how much you should buy into it. But I know the fact that the coach is still coaching with cancer in there, I have to assume that this team is all in. And the fact that their coach, kind of like the opposite of what happened with LSU, where their coach left, so you have to wonder what the morale is on that team. I think Old Dominion has to have one of the highest morales in the entire tournament, based on the fact that they've rallied around their coach. I'm not sure if they were expected to win their conference tournament. They were able to do it, and they have an emotional edge over Purdue. And I feel badly about using, a coach's health conditions, for potential profit. But I have to assume that Old Dominion will definitely play a lot harder than Purdue will in this game. Old Dominion is going to lay it all on the line for their coach, and I think Old Dominion will cover. First half under, I like in this game. This is one of those rare occasions where I do like the full game under more than the first half under, because of the fact that I think that Purdue is so volatile that they could start off really well and then choke late. Plus, Purdue has been known historically to struggle dramatically with the full court press, as they have done against Little Rock and some other teams in the past. So I would not be surprised to see Old Dominion switch to a more aggressive look in the second half if things are not going their way in terms of adjustments. I don't like Coach Painter as a in-game adjustment coach. I think he's a very solid coach for getting the most out of his players. But in terms of in-game substitutions and strategy and stuff like that, I don't really trust him at halftime in terms of adjustments. So I will actually take the full game under as opposed. But in terms of my plays for this game, the Scout, I will be parlaying Old Dominion money line with the under just for maximum profit. But I will have a single bet hedge on Old Dominion plus 13. So for example, $20, you parlay $20 on Old Dominion money line and the under, but I'll have a single bet to win whatever to cover that value on Old Dominion plus 13 because I think Old Dominion will cover. So I'm taking Old Dominion with this upset. I think Purdue's extremely overrated. Old Dominion's conference is bad. It is very bad. I'm not going to lie too. But so was Little Rock's conference when Purdue lost to Little Rock in the first round that one year. So I'm not immediately saying you should write teams off because of their conference. But Old Dominion, it's more stylistically. I think that Old Dominion, Purdue loves to get out and transition because they really struggle in the half court. So if you get a team like Old Dominion who can force Purdue into half-court possessions, limit fast break points, do all this stuff, I don't think Purdue's efficient enough to score on a regular basis against Old Dominion. I don't think so. So I'm going to be taking Old Dominion in this game, and I think that will be the first shocker, even though I think that the Big Ten, as I stated before, is extremely overrated, and I have no confidence in pretty much any of the Big Ten teams with the exception of maybe Michigan and Michigan State. But I think all the other teams are overrated. But I'm going to move on in there. So I got Old Dominion in that upset. In terms of spreads, that is the biggest upset I have in my tournament, because that's a 13-point spread, and I like Old Dominion in that game. Now moving on, you have Cincinnati against Iowa. I'm not going to spend really any time on this. I like Cincinnati in this game. I know Iowa is a solid offensive team, but it's important to mention that this game, I don't know how this is fair. Cincinnati's playing a first-round game in Columbus, Ohio. How does that make any sense? In what way is that fair to Iowa? Iowa's a 10 seed. They're from the Big Ten. I get that. Bohannon's a great player. But I don't get how the committee can let a 7-seed team virtually play on their home court in the first round. I don't know how that makes any sense. You can't put Cincinnati in their home state as a 7 seed in the first round. That's completely unfair. Iowa's terrible on the road. You know that Cincinnati is going to pretty much sell out the building because it's in Ohio. I'm taking Cincinnati. I think Iowa, I know that they struggled late because their coach got suspended, but he came back. Cincinnati was favored by 3. They're up to 3.5. I have to like Cincinnati. Iowa plays not much defense, and they love to go up-tempo, and Cincinnati's the exact opposite. And in these matchups between great offenses and great defenses, great defense usually prevails due to consistency. I like Cincinnati minus 3.5 in this game on basically their home court. Now moving on, Tennessee Colgate. Not going to spend any time on that. I like Tennessee winning that game. Tennessee should win that game handily. Where Tennessee, I believe they got killed by Auburn, but I believe that Cronin will have the Bearcats fired up. And I think that it definitely will play a factor when everybody in the first game of a tournament will be able to have their family and friends in attendance because the venue is virtually right next to their home arena, and Iowa has to travel from the Midwest to Ohio. I don't think that's going to be a fun time for them. I think that Cincinnati will definitely have a home court advantage, and I think that Mick Cronin is an extremely underrated coach. The only problem I have with Cincinnati is their scoring. Besides Cumberland, they don't really have much talent on the offensive end, but I think that their physicality is going to absolutely demolish. I'm actually going to get to that It Is Us because I actually think Cincinnati is poised to make a run against Tennessee. I'll get to that in a second, but I'm going to keep it going. I like Tennessee beating Colgate. Actually, you know what? I'll mention it now because I said I'm going to break down the rest of – I'm going to finish the first round, and I'm going to move on, and I'll do the rest of the later round picks tomorrow. Do I think Tennessee will lose to Cincinnati? I saw this stat on Twitter the other day, which is that since 1997, there's been 13 instances where a 2 seed has won 6 or fewer games in their last 10. So a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament that went 6-4 or worse in their last 10 games going in to the NCAA tournament. Out of those 13 teams since 1997, 9 of those 2 seeds have lost in the second round. 9 of the 13. Now, I know that I don't like to mention a lot of stats historically because, all these teams are independent. But if 9 out of 13 teams are losing in the second round as a 2 seed, that's a trend I have to pay attention to. That's something I have to pay attention to. And Tennessee applies to that situation. Tennessee is a 2 seed. They only went 6-4 in their last 10 games entering the NCAA tournament. Do I think Cincinnati will beat Tennessee? Honestly, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still not really sure. But I'll tell you right now, Tennessee loves to play up-tempo. Cincinnati does not. Grant Williams, very solid forward. I'm a bigger fan of Schofield. I think Schofield's the best player on that team. But Grant Williams plays an extremely slow – Grant Williams, people accuse him of flopping in college. And if you watch Tennessee play, he does. He flops a lot. And he draws a lot of fouls, and he does a lot of the stuff that the people do in the NBA. But kind of like the NBA playoffs, I expect there to be less whistles in this tournament, and I think that there will be an emphasis in college basketball for the refs to let the players play, so to speak. And you know that Tennessee, although they travel pretty well, is anybody really impressed with the way Tennessee's played the last couple of weeks? I know that they beat Kentucky twice in that time span. And I know that you could argue that they didn't care about the conference title game against Auburn because they beat Kentucky, they laid an egg, they didn't care, they proved that they can handle it, which makes me worried because I don't know how consistent Tennessee is based on the fact that they tend to just overlook opponents every now and then, particularly with Auburn as well. They've lost twice to Auburn in the last 2 weeks or so. Tennessee tends to come out and they either play really well and they can beat any team in the country, or they come out flat as a pancake. And Cincinnati, with their physicality and just the home court advantage alone in Ohio, I think Cincinnati will end up beating Tennessee in the second round in Columbus. Would I bet on that happening? Probably not. But it's mostly just because a lot of people are going to pick Tennessee to win their region because they just don't like Virginia. And I really think this Tennessee team is overvalued, in my opinion. I think that the conflicting styles between Tennessee and Cincinnati definitely suits Cincinnati, who loves to slow the tempo down. Tennessee loves to play up tempo. They love to run up and down the court, and Cincinnati will do whatever they can to prevent that from happening. I think Mick Cronin is one of the most underrated coaches in all of college basketball. I think he's tremendous. And I also, people typically don't like Cincinnati's conference. They smacked Houston in the conference tournament, in the conference title game. They smacked them. And that conference is pretty good. You throw in UCF, you have Houston, you have Cincinnati. That's a pretty decent conference. That's really not bad. But at the same point, Tennessee itself, you know, I could see them struggling. I think Schofield will struggle. Yeah, Temple also. Yeah, well, Temple. Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a good call also. Yeah, I forgot about that. Temple's also in the tournament. Good call, Philly Joe. But overall, that conference is really not that bad. And people won't talk about him because Houston hasn't really gone on a run in tournaments. And Cincinnati, a while back, would go on some runs in the tournament. Back when they had like Yancey with Cincinnati a couple years ago, or they had like Sean Kilpatrick. But overall, I think Cincinnati at home, this game's a home game. Assuming Cincinnati wins the first round game against Iowa, it's a home game against Tennessee for the most part. And if you're looking for a little upset that could, you know, separate your bracket from other people's brackets, I think taking Cincinnati, beating Tennessee is definitely a great approach to doing that. Because you pretty much get a 7 seed in a home game against a team that a lot of people have going to the Final Four. And that stat, though, I know that people don't follow long-term stats, but 9 of 13 2-seeds since 1997 who have gone 6-4 or worse in their last 10 games before the tournament, 9 of the 13 have lost in the second round of the tournament. That's an insane stat. I saw that on Twitter yesterday. I looked it up. It's 100% true. I think Cincinnati will beat Tennessee. And Tennessee, even last year, they were poised to make a run and then ended up losing to Loyola Chicago. Now, I know Loyola Chicago ended up making it to the Final Four, but I think we can all agree that Tennessee was the more talented team, and Tennessee probably should have won that game, and they didn't. Because Loyola plays fundamentally sound basketball, which is what Cincinnati likes to do. The one issue I have with Cincinnati long-term is their lack of depth in scoring, because they rely pretty much on Cumberland alone. But I think Cincinnati will do enough with their physicality to win that game. So I actually like the upset. I didn't take the Prairie View game tonight, actually. Did I miss that already? I didn't get to that. I was actually going to go to I was going to do Gonzaga's. I'm already at 1 hour and 23. Yeah, it might end up being 2 hours. I'm going to mention that in a little bit, but I'm actually going to keep going through. I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible. North Carolina, Iona, North Carolina. I think North Carolina is scoring more than 100 points in this game. If you want to know my bet for that game, I mean, I'm not saying automatically that Tennessee is going to lose to Cincinnati. I think you have to factor in where these games are played. And in actually one of the one of the March Madness guides that I helped write for Winners and Winers and Statsalt.com, I mentioned that location matters because of the fact that teams are going to be traveling. You're going to have teams all over the place, and you're going to have teams away from home, which is important. For Cincinnati, it does a lot to be able to sleep in your own bed and to be surrounded by your friends and family around game time. It helps with the routine. And when you're in college, it's very important for teams to, you know, be surrounded by familiar circumstances because they're young kids. Most of them are roughly 18, 19 years old. And when they're away from home, it adds to the pressure and it adds to the tenseness of the situation. And I think that being at home will definitely favor Cincinnati in this game. If it was on a full neutral, I think Tennessee would win. But the fact that it's in Ohio, I think is offensive. I think it's wrong. And I think that Cincinnati is going to make Tennessee pay for it. But in terms of the 750, if Tennessee gets past Cincinnati, they could easily beat Virginia. I don't think it's a terrible investment. I just think that Cincinnati playing in Ohio definitely suits them to pull off this type of upset. But anyway, I'm going to be moving on. The Purdue A&M game I'll go on next, where I'll go into Gonzaga side. But as of right now, North Carolina, Iona. For this game, North Carolina will win this game by 30. This game will be a destruction. They've already played previously in the tournament. North Carolina won that game by roughly 50. I think that North Carolina will definitely smack Iona. I think Iona was a member of the worst conference in all of college basketball with the MAC. That conference is terrible. And as I'm looking through, North Carolina is favored by 24.5 points, and the line right now is at 166 for the total. I think North Carolina is scoring over 100 in this game. I think North Carolina is putting up triple digits. Both these teams go up-tempo. North Carolina has too many big men. Kobe White's tremendous. Cameron Johnson's tremendous. You also have Little, who's underachieved, but he's still a solid player. And you also have Kenny Williams, a solid three-point shooter. This game's going to have at least 170 points. I like the over in this North Carolina game. 24.5 points is a lot for a team to be covering, especially when they're going to pull all their starters late in the game. If you ask me to parlay this or to make anything, North Carolina spread first half together with the first half over, I think makes a lot of sense, because I think North Carolina is just going to start the game. They're going to blow them out. This game's going to be up-tempo. North Carolina's too big. They're too physical. Iona's absolutely – they have no chance. Iona's going to get killed. And I am worried about Roy Williams benching the starters for the majority of the second half. I like the full game over at 166. I like the first half over, whatever number that's going to be. But I think if you can parlay first halves, I think North Carolina versus Iona first half over is the play for a parlay. Because I think North Carolina in the first half is scoring more than 50 points. I think North Carolina's going to come into this game and just get easy dunks pretty much on every possession. And I also think that North Carolina has a decent bench in comparison to Iona's. North Carolina's going to kill this team. And I think that the first half over and North Carolina spread first half is a very solid parlay to go with. And I'm staying away from the full game spread because North Carolina, excuse me, when they're up 30 at some point, will pull all the starters. And I don't trust seeing North Carolina's walk-ons for the last 5 minutes of a game I have money on. So I'll be taking North Carolina first half and North Carolina first half over in that game. Moving on, Utah State and Washington. I am going with Utah State in this game. Washington loves to play a 2-3 zone. They are one of the only teams that play a 2-3 zone. They are tremendous at blocking shots. They're great on defense. I get it. They only score 69.8 points per game. Solid players. They did not look good in the Pac-12 tournament, and I think that the Pac-12, as I stated before, is just a terrible conference in general. And Utah State is one of the most underrated teams in the country. This team is on fire. And they rolled through the Mountain West Conference. They beat San Diego State. They ended up, they demolished some teams. And overall, Utah State, people will remember that they upset Nevada earlier in the tournament. And they also they upset Nevada earlier this season. And I think that Utah State is just simply too good, led by guard Sam Merrill. I think that the main thing, though, is if I ask you right now, how do you beat a zone? The answer is through three-point shooting. Because you're going to force the team to shoot three-pointers from the outside, and you're going to hope that it works out. Utah State has solid three-point shooting. They're shooting over 35% from three as a team. They also have a couple of guards who are shooting roughly 38% from the three-point line, with Sam Merrill's averaging 21 points per game, shooting 38% from three. Then you have Diago Brito shooting 39.6% from three. It's also important to mention the Aggies are tremendous on the boards. They are fifth in the nation in defensive rebounding percentage. And that's extremely important because since you're playing a 2-3 zone, one of the things that you automatically set yourself up for is offensive rebounds. Because of the fact that nobody's manned up on a guy, it's extremely hard to box out from 2-3 zones. And that's how Syracuse tends to lose in the tournament at some point. They'll just give up a ton of offensive rebounds. And I think, same with Baylor, and I think that Utah State will win this game due to second chance points, offensive rebounding, and three-point shooting. So I like Utah State to get the job done in this game against Washington. Now, Auburn versus New Mexico State. This game is very tricky. I had New Mexico State last year beating Clemson in the first round, and that just didn't happen. This team's very good defensively, giving up 64 points per game. They're also 8th in offensive rebounding and 4th in defensive rebounding. So New Mexico State's a really good rebounding team. They're really good rebounding the ball. But the question is, do I trust them against an Auburn team that is arguably the hottest team in the country entering the tournament? They ran through the SEC tournament, but they're also extremely inefficient. You have Harper and you have Bryce Brown. Both of them are just extremely inefficient from the floor, and Auburn loves to live and die by the three. So I think New Mexico State is actually in a great position to pull off this upset, especially since everybody's going to be picking Auburn because of what they did in the SEC tournament. But I'm going to take Auburn in this game. I think that they have the better athletes. I think that New Mexico State is a very solid team. I just really don't like the matchup that they have. But would I be surprised if New Mexico State wins this game? No. I think Auburn's either going to go to the Sweet 16 or lose in the first round. New Mexico State has a great defense, and I get that. But Auburn, Bruce Pearl, I like in the NCAA tournament. Plus, New Mexico State's only shooting 67.5% from the foul line. They're a terrible free throw shooting team, and I don't trust the team that misses free throws late in games to pull off upsets of this caliber. So I will be going with Auburn. But in terms of spreads, there's no way I'm laying this with Auburn. I think Auburn's going to win. Not going to touch the spread. Then you have Kansas and Northeastern. Who do I like in this game? This game's tough because Northeastern I've seen play. I didn't think that the CAA was that good of a conference this year. Hofstra was the best team in the conference, but if you watch them towards the end of the season, they started falling apart late in the year, and Northeastern was able to win. Northeastern's a solid team. They have some great three-point shooting options on there. But overall, I know everybody knows Kansas has been awful this year in terms of underachieving, with Azubuike getting injured, as well as Vic leaving the program. And Vic was one of my favorite players on that team. But Kansas was still decent. They're still a 4 seed. It's not like they're immediately terrible. Northeastern has won each of their last 7 games. They're a solid team. They will be a popular upset pick because of the fact that Kansas has played terribly this entire season, and Northeastern is shooting 38.8% from the three-point line, and Vasa Pusitka is averaging 17.8 points per game while shooting 40% from the three-point line. I'm going to take Kansas in this game. I know that Kansas has underachieved this year. I have to assume that Kansas has significantly better athletes, and I think that Northeastern will live and die by the 3 in this game. Will this game be extremely close throughout? Yes. And Northeastern also shoots 75% from the foul line. I love Northeastern as a team, but Kansas itself, I know that Kansas is going to dominate the boards like they always do. Northeastern's only averaging 31.8 rebounds per game. That is awful. 38.8 rebounds per game. Where meanwhile, Kansas is averaging 38.1. I know that Northeastern loves to shoot a lot of threes. I know that they might make a lot of threes, and they're efficient on offense. But Kansas has better athletes, and they are significantly better on the offensive boards. I think that Kansas will get a lot of second chance points. I think they'll dominate the game in the paint, and I think Kansas will win this game. Would I ever bet the spread? No. I wouldn't touch this game with a 10-foot pole. But in terms of a bracket, I'm going to go with Kansas because I think Northeastern's lack of rebounding will be its demise, as Kansas will be able to lead the way through Dedrick Lawson, who's averaging 19.1 points per game and 10.5 rebounds. Lawson's getting a double-double. I think Lawson's going to get at least 12 rebounds in this game. And I think Kansas will do enough to sneak by Northeastern in this game. Moving on, Iowa State versus Ohio State. Now I'm going to go on record here. I don't think Ohio State should be in the tournament. I don't think they were good enough. They beat Indiana in the conference tournament. Good for them. I don't really care. I watched them play Wisconsin, where they came back in that magical second half run just to lose in overtime. They're an 11 seed. They're against Iowa State. And Iowa State just won its conference tournament after beating Kansas in the final, and they are all clicking at the right time. Iowa State's favored by 5.5 in this game. And I have to go with Iowa State in this game, but I think Ohio State is interesting. It seems like every year there's one team that the committee puts into the tournament that shouldn't be in the tournament, and yet they win a couple games. Well, last year it was Syracuse. A couple of years before that, You know, you had VCU that one year. They went to the Final Four. People thought they shouldn't have been in the first place. Ohio State, I don't think should be in, but they were given a second life, and they're still a very fundamentally sound team. I think Iowa State will win this game, and I will pick them to win this game. But I think this Iowa State team is overrated, and I think that the Big 12 itself is extremely overrated. So winning the conference tournament won't really mean much to them long term. But I think that they will do enough to beat Ohio State. I'm not going to lay the spread. I think this game will be a lot closer than people think it will be. But I will be taking Iowa State to win this game. But I do think Ohio State will cover this spread. Now, moving forward, the next game I will be looking at is between Houston and Georgia State. And Georgia State's a solid team. Georgia State's a really good team, led by Coach Hunter. People remember him falling off the chair in that game against Baylor a couple of years ago after his son hit that go-ahead three-point shot. But for me, I got to go with Houston. Georgia State 0-1 against top 25 teams this year. Houston 3-1. Georgia State's conference is not that great, and it got even worse when you see a team like UT Arlington dominate conference play. They were 12-6 in conference play, UT Arlington, but they were around 500 on the entire season as a true testament to how bad the conference was. Georgia State's really good. I recommended Georgia State as a play on, I forgot what day it was. On Sunday, I had them winning their conference tournament in the Sun Belt. But for me, I think Houston's a better all-around team. I think Houston will be able to do whatever they want offensively, and I think that Houston will be able to cover this, to win this game. In terms of spreads, I think this game will be close, but I think Houston's a better team. I think Houston's poised for a run in this tournament, and I think Houston will win this game. Moving on, Wofford Seton Hall. Can't really go wrong. This game is, for me, one of the most interesting matchups between the 7 and the 10, in that the sense it can go either way. I do think Seton Hall relies too much on Miles Powell in terms of scoring, and I don't really trust this team in the long term. Seton Hall had a good year, but I've watched Wofford play, and people are immediately going to think Wofford, like they're a 7 seed, you know, they haven't played anybody all year. They beat South Carolina, who's not in the tournament. They haven't really challenged themselves that much. They did play North Carolina earlier this year, and it was competitive for a decent portion of that game. But overall, Wofford is 0-3 against top 25 teams this season. But Wofford is 12th in offensive efficiency, and they are 4th in effective field goal percentage, and they are 2nd in three-point field goal percentage. So for me, I think Wofford's going to score enough points. If you don't know who Fletcher McGee is, you got to watch this guy play. Fletcher McGee is pretty much the next J.J. Redick, almost, and he styles his play off of J.J. Redick, where he right now has the 2nd most 3 points made in the history of college basketball, and he's about 10 behind the all-time record. I think he's going to break the record at some point. I think McGee's at risk to go for 20 to 30 points in this game. Plus, you have a Storm, who's really solid as a point guard. Wofford doesn't have many big men, but neither does Seton Hall. And I think that Wofford will win this game and prove that they should be a 7 seed, and they will win. They're also top 60 in offensive and defensive rebounding rates, so I think that Wofford will be able to take care of business against Seton Hall. And there's a reason why, even though Seton Hall looks tempting as an underdog, there's a reason why Wofford's favored by 3 points in this game. I think Wofford will get the job done. Moving on, Kentucky and against Abilene Christian. Not going to spend any time. Kentucky. Take Kentucky to win this game. Spreads I don't really know about. Although if anybody else has any more questions they want to ask me as I go into the last portion of this bracket with Gonzaga, you're more than welcome to do so. But I'm going to be moving on to the Gonzaga side. So take Kentucky against Abilene Christian. I'm not even going to waste my time. Moving on, you have Gonzaga, who officially is the worst 1 seed in the tournament. And they are going up against the winner of the Prairie View game, which plays in the first 4, where Prairie View is going up against Dickinson. And in terms of this game, it's really a toss-up for me. I'm talking about the play-in game. Dickinson's favored by 1.5. Prairie View, I did see them play against Texas Southern. Very good offensive team. They dominated their conference. I actually like Dickinson in this game. I think Dickinson is a better all-around team. Prairie View's defense is awful. And I think that Dickinson's been in the tournament in recent years also. So the coaching staff's been there before. Their defense is giving up roughly 71 points per game. Not bad at all. I think that this game is going to be very close throughout. I don't really know. It is important to note, though, that Dickinson's last game was on the 12th, and Prairie View's last game was on the 16th. So Dickinson's coming into this game with an extra 4 days of rest. And I think that's extremely important when it comes to these type of games. So I like Dickinson winning because they have not played since the 12th. So they're extra rested. They've had extra time to game plan. And Prairie View A&M did not. So I will lean towards Dickinson in that game. In terms of Seton Hall, the game's a coin flip. I agree. I just think Wofford's more efficient. And I think that the only way Seton Hall wins the game is if Miles Powell goes off for 25-plus points, for 20-plus points, which is more than capable of doing. But if Powell struggles, Seton Hall's not going to get any scoring from anybody else. Powell is pretty much a one-man show on that team. And I think that Wofford is a better defensive unit. So I think Wofford has a better chance of stopping Powell than Seton Hall does of stopping Fletcher McGee. So Wofford will win that game, but it's a toss-up. You can go either way. In the long run, does it really matter? No. I think both teams are going to lose to Kentucky anyway in the second round. But I like Wofford in that game just because I've seen Wofford play a decent amount of the year, and I like Wofford in that one. But moving on, so I like Dickinson winning against Prairie View A&M, and then the winner of that will lose to Gonzaga ultimately. I think Gonzaga, regardless of who wins this game, I think Gonzaga is going to kill this team by 40. I think the fact that Gonzaga lost to St. Mary's in its conference, tournament game, conference tournament title, Gonzaga now everybody thinks is a fraud. And if you watch Gonzaga play, they are not frauds. This team is actually tremendous. I think that Gonzaga will destroy Dickinson or Prairie View by at least 40 points. This team has dominated the West Coast Conference, and they've won the majority of their games by 30 points. It will be somewhere in the 28 to 32 range, I'd say, when the lines get posted. Gonzaga will win this game by 40. This game's going to be a destruction, and I think Gonzaga will destroy whoever they play in the first round and cover the spread. Moving on, Syracuse and Baylor. This is actually one of my best plays in the tournament. I am obviously going to be taking Syracuse -2 against Baylor. Was at 1.5. It's up to 2.5 in some spots, but it is 2 in this game. Both teams play a 2-3 zone. Both teams thrive on defense. Only one of these teams is Coach Boeheim. And I think that's the main difference between these teams. I will never go against Syracuse in the tournament. There's no reason to. Boeheim always gets his players to play extremely well in the NCAA tournament. And assuming Tyus Battle's playing, that's a huge factor. Tyus Battle's the best player in Syracuse, and he needs to play in order for Syracuse to go on any potential run. And I think he needs to play if they're going to beat Baylor. But Baylor in the Big 12, as I said before, I think the Big 12 is overrated. I think the ACC is the best conference in all of college basketball. I think that's a given. The fact that they had 3 1 seeds, and yet Syracuse was able to beat Duke on the road. I know that Reddish didn't play in that game, but you still had to go against, Zion, and you still had to go up against Barrett in Duke. I like Syracuse. Even with Zion, Syracuse gave him a run for the majority of that game. I agree, Philly Joe. I think the fact that Syracuse is only favored by 2 points in this game is laughable. I think if Tyus Battle is playing in this game, Syracuse should be favored by at least 5 to 6 points between these teams. I know that it's an 8-9 matchup, but I think everyone can agree that Syracuse is a significantly better team than Baylor. And I think that Syracuse will win this game by roughly 7 to 8 points. Syracuse is the better team. They have the best player in Tyus Battle. And I think Syracuse will be able to win this game relatively easily as Baylor's NCAA tournament woes continue, as Jim Boeheim looks for another deep run with a relatively average seed. So, yeah, Joe, I agree with you. I would never go against Boeheim. For me, going against Boeheim in the tournament's a waste of money. I think there are a lot better coaches you can fade in the tournament than Jim Boeheim, because Boeheim just knows how to make adjustments mid-game. And I think that that's something that's very underrated. You see a lot of coaches who they're either great recruiters or, they are very good in-game coaches. It's very rare to find a coach who's willing to pull the plug on his entire game plan if something is not working. And Boeheim's one of those guys. Boeheim knows situations, and he knows, for example, that one Elite 8 game against Virginia where they were getting blown out by 18, and he just decided, you know what, we're going to full court press the entire game from the second half onward. Not many coaches would have done that. But Boeheim has been around for so long. He's seen everything. He knows every circumstance. And he knows how to get the system down to a T. Baylor also loves to run a 2-3 zone, but I think Syracuse's is better. I think Boeheim's probably the greatest zone coach of all time in terms of defensive scheme. I'm taking Boeheim. I think 2.5 is laughable. I'm going to have money on Syracuse easily. Syracuse, I'll probably have a couple of units on just because I really don't see how Baylor is going to win this game. So I will be going with Syracuse in this game. And I think Syracuse could be in line to upset Gonzaga. Do I think they will? No. But I think that Syracuse is definitely in line to cover the spread against Gonzaga in the second round game. But Gonzaga, specifically with Clark and Tilly back, I think is going to be too much for Syracuse to handle in that zone. Battle is supposed to be back. I know that he's supposed to be, but I like to get confirmation on that. Battle playing, 2.5 is a joke. Syracuse will win this game by roughly 6 or 7 points with Battle playing. I have to like Battle. Plus, Boeheim's son, Buddy Boeheim's actually been really good lately, and he's provided a nice spark from the three-point line. And I think that Syracuse will be able to win this game. So I'm taking Syracuse. Moving on, I will be going with – now this is a game where everybody's picking the upset. Everybody is going to take Murray State over Marquette. Everybody. Because you have John Morant and a team that won the conference tournament against a Marquette team that has imploded probably worse than any team this season besides TCU towards the end of the year in terms of imploding. Now, Marquette, I did watch Marquette play against St. John's in the conference tournament where they absolutely murdered just murdered St. John's by 30. But overall, Marquette has not played well. They were on a 4-game losing streak. Then they beat St. John's. Then they lost to Seton Hall in the conference tournament. Yeah, I'd assume, Phil, that the line is a little bit low because of the fact that Battle can't play. It's also low because of the fact that to beat a 2-3, as I said before, you have to be good at hitting 3-point shots. Yeah, I'll rate all the plays when I finish. That's fine. But overall, for me, I think the line is low because of the fact that Battle's not at 100%, and Syracuse as a team is not a good 3-point shooting team. They've been better lately with Boeheim and everybody like that. So I think people are worried about Syracuse's ability to shoot the long ball against the 2-3 zone. But overall, I don't really care. I'm taking Boeheim in a tournament, and 2.5 just looks like free money to me, and I'm going to take it. And it might be, a little bit of a square play or so, but money's already come in on it. I don't really care. I think Syracuse is going to beat this Baylor team. I've seen Baylor play. Not that great. Baylor looks like a poorer version of Syracuse. I think they both try to do the same thing. They both struggle, shooting from the outside, and they both play the same 2-3 zone, but I like Syracuse winning that game. And moving on, everybody's going to be taking Murray State. John Morant, top 3 pick. You've seen him on SportsCenter. If you watch him against Belmont, he was tremendous. He had 36 points. And then you have Marquette, who they have the Hauser twins who have been average at best lately. And you have Marcus Howard, who's averaging 26 points per game and who should be in line for a Player of the Year award that he won't get. But I think he should be in line for it. But in terms of who I like in this game, I am actually going to take Marquette. And I know a lot of people will say I like Murray State in this game, and I understand why. But don't you think it's a little bit weird that Murray State is 4.5-point underdogs against Marquette? I mean, for me, I remember a couple years ago when Middle Tennessee State was playing against Minnesota in the first round, a 12v5 matchup. And everybody liked Middle Tennessee State. Middle Tennessee State was favored by 1 point as the 12 seed against the 5 seed. My question is that if everybody is going to be on Murray State, and you know that nobody likes Marquette, why is Marquette favored by 4.5 points? For me, that looks like a major red flag, and that looks like a major trap line. The issue I have with Murray State, it's also present with Marquette, but I think it's more so with Murray State. Besides John Morant, I don't think anybody else can score. I think that Murray State relies on one guy to carry the entire team. And although it worked in the regular season, in their conference, I get it. I know that it worked in the OVC, but if you just look at Murray State, another 27-4, I know Morant is a tremendous talent. I know he's almost unguardable. But Murray State, I just don't know if I trust this team when Morant doesn't have it going offensively. Maybe just for me. I think the fact that Marquette is at -4.5 shows that Vegas is disrespecting Murray State, and the fact that Vegas is disrespecting Murray State makes me believe that Marquette is the side in this game. I think Marcus Howard and Morant will cancel each other out. I think they're both unguardable players in college. I think they both have pro futures. I think they'll both go for 20-plus points, if not 30-plus points. But other than that, I think that Marquette they've had definitely a harder level of competition. And Murray State did win its conference tournament, but Belmont's starting center, who's averaging roughly 13 points per game or so, didn't even play. So Belmont was a weaker team than they were all season when Murray State beat them. That's what I would assume, Philly Joe. I mean, I think Murray State should do the same thing with Marcus Howard. Realistically, I don't know why you would let a player like Morant or Marcus Howard get theirs and not dare anybody else to step up. Now, the problem that you have with doing that is that Morant is kind of a pick your poison guy where he's averaging 10 assists per game. So he's not afraid to pass the ball, and Morant will get his. But I have to assume that, first off, Marquette also shoots 39% from three. This team will live and die by the three, and I get that. Marcus Howard averaging 25 points per game. Hauser, both twins are averaging over 9.7 points per game. Murray State has more double-digit scores, but Marquette's played against better opponents. It should be a high-scoring game. I agree. But I agree with you on that, with the over and all that. The one thing that I will notice, though, is that Marquette later in the season did play a decent amount of unders. And the issue that you run into that is, let's just say, for example, hypothetically, this game turns into a blowout. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that Murray State wins this game by 10 points or so. This line is at 149.5. Marquette, if they're going to keep it close, they need Marcus Howard to play well. So the question that I have is, if Marcus Howard does not play well, let's just say Marcus Howard or Morant don't play well, do you still like the over, Philly Joe? That's the question I ask you. Or do you believe in order for the over to hit, both of these players have to score more than 20 points? I personally think both players need to score more than 20 points in order for this game to get over the total. That's my opinion. Plus Murray State, Belmont, as I said before, averaging 87 points per game, and Murray State held them to 65. This Murray State team is a very underrated defensive team, and Marquette and Murray State both love to settle for jump shots, so I can see both teams struggling a little bit early on. This game should go over. I think this game will be in the mid to high 70s. I think it'll squeak over. But, Philly Joe, just consider the fact that if Marcus Howard or Morant have a slumping day, they just aren't there. They've just had a bad day. They lay an egg. Is this over dead? And I think the answer is yes. I think Howard and Morant need to score more than 20 points in order for this game to go over the total. That's my opinion. I agree. I think it'll go over anyway. But Marquette relies on a lot of jump shots. And if Howard doesn't have his game, they're going to slow it down into a pick-and-roll style. I still like the over. I agree. I'm more confident about the Yale and LSU overs and some other games. But I agree. But I'm just saying, just watch out. You might want to live hedge that, if possible, if either player, if not both, are struggling tremendously from the floor. But moving on, I'm gonna be taking Marquette in that game just because everybody's gonna be on Murray State. It's a rare moment where it's a contrarian favorite pick where everybody is going to be picking the 12 seed, but yet the 5 seed is still favored by more than 4 points. So I'm gonna be taking Marquette. That line looks really weird to me, and I'm going to be taking Marquette. If Murray State wins, would I be shocked? No. But it's a matter of fact that Murray State will be the most popular 12 versus 5 upset pick out of anybody's bracket. So if you want to be a little bit different, I think taking Marquette here is not a bad play. But moving on, not for the spread, though. I wouldn't touch the spread at all in this game. The over I do like, but I would be a little bit wary of the fact that Howard, I agree. Liberty's the best 12 seed. I said that before. I think Liberty's beating Mississippi State. I said that before. I'm talking about the general consensus of random people in these bracket pools will tend to the majority of bracket pools are mostly just squares who don't really know what they're doing. They don't watch much college basketball, and they just look at recent records and recent last 10 games and say, oh, Murray State went 27-4 and Marquette lost the majority of its last 10 games. I gotta go with Murray State. But that's just a given. That's the problem. Is that Murray State's going to be the most popular 12 seed upset pick based on how Marquette has played lately. I think Liberty has the best chance of pulling off the 12v5 upset, and I think Murray State is going to be the public pick for a 12v5. And I think that Murray State is not as good of a team as Liberty is, and I think that Marquette will be able to beat Murray State. But the problem is that Morant goes to the foul line at least 10 times a game. He draws fouls. Everybody loves every 12 seed. But I think we can all agree that Murray State, led by a top 3 draft pick, will be the ultimate square 12 seed bet that people will make. I think in terms of all the 12 seeds, Liberty, nobody watches because nobody would watch the Atlantic Sun. And everybody's going to say, John Morant, top 3 pick. They can easily beat Marquette. I'll throw money on it. That's what every square is going to do. That's pretty much going to be what every 12 seed upset's going to be in any given bracket pool. So I think if you're trying to be a little bit different, you take Marquette because of the fact that everybody's going to be taking Murray State in terms of upsets. And I think you're better off taking Liberty to pull off the upset as opposed to Murray State. But I'm going to move on. After that, Florida State, Vermont. Vermont's good, but we just talked about why I don't like Murray State too much because they rely on one guy. Vermont literally has one guy. They have junior forward Anthony Lamb. Now, Lamb is remarkable. He's a really good player. He's averaging over 20 points per game. He's averaging over 7 rebounds per game. He's great. Other than that, their whole conference stinks. Conference got even worse when Stony Brook lost to Binghamton in the first round of the conference tournament. They didn't have to play Stony Brook. They got a layup in Binghamton. They beat them by 50, as they should. I mean, American East, their conference, you have UMBC, who came off a double overtime game to play in the championship game. You have Stony Brook, who lost in the first round to Binghamton in the first round of their tournament. Besides Anthony Lamb, this team doesn't have anybody else. I mean, you have Ernie Duncan, who's okay, and you have Steph Smith. But Florida State, I don't like Leonard Hamilton as a coach in game. He's a great recruiter. Florida State just made it to their conference tournament final against Duke. They beat Virginia in the conference tournament. Florida State has too much length. I think Florida State's going to dominate the boards in this game. And I think Vermont will keep it close early because Florida State tends to start off slow. But I really don't see how Vermont is going to keep up in the boards. I know Vermont right now, they are second nationally in defensive rebounding rate, but that has to do with the people that they've played. If you look at their entire schedule on who they've played against Kansas, they lost by 16. Played against Louisville, they lost by 8. And then after that, you go into conference play. Now, if you actually look at the matchups against Kansas in depth, they got out-rebounded by 10. So I understand the idea that, the rebounding rate's really good. You also have to remember who they're playing. How's it going, Brian? Thanks for joining us. I understand that people are going to look at the stats and say, oh, just keep in mind this moving forward, even the teams that I do like. People are going to be like, oh, Vermont's the second best rebounding team in the entire country because of, their rankings. But who have they played? That's the problem. The American East is, don't get me wrong, congratulations, you're out-rebounding Binghamton by 20. That doesn't mean anything. Binghamton went 10-23. It doesn't matter. You out-rebounded Hartford. You out-rebounded UMBC. Congratulations. You played Kansas without Azubuike. You got out-rebounded by 10. You lost by 16 points. I think Vermont's a good story. I think that Leonard Hamilton's an overrated coach for Florida State, but that's mostly in close games. I think Florida State has too many big men. They're going to dominate the paint. They're going to dominate the post. I don't think anybody's going to stop them. I think Florida State will win this game. Do I trust the spread? No, I don't. I think Vermont could get a backdoor cover, but I do think Florida State will be able to win this game against Vermont. And I really just don't think this Vermont team, I know that the rebounding rate's good, but they haven't played the likes of Florida State. And Florida State has a ton of large human beings on their team. And I think that they are going to dominate the glass. And I think Florida State will have a lot of second chance opportunities. And I think Terrence Mann will play well from the guard position. So I like Florida State there. Moving on, Buffalo versus the Arizona State and St. John's winner in the first 4. I'm going to talk about the first 4 game first, as I have done in the past, as I'm at an hour and 52. Hour and 58. So I'm going to try to finish this as quickly as possible because I want to close it around 2 hours. I like Arizona State winning the play-in game. I root for St. John's. This team has fallen apart. Simon's played well. Pons has not. Clark has been useless in recent weeks. And I like Dort in this matchup playing well. And Arizona State has had some quality wins this season against Kansas and some other teams. I like Kansas in that game. I think Buffalo is beating either team. I don't think St. John's or Arizona State has much of a shot against Buffalo. So I like Buffalo there. Moving on, Texas Tech, Northern Kentucky. I like Texas Tech winning. But Drew McDonald is a matchup problem for Texas Tech, so I do not like that spread, needless to say. But I do think Texas Tech will win. Florida and Nevada, that's a complete toss-up for me. I will be taking Florida just because I think that they're a better defensive team. And Nevada's laid multiple eggs this season in conference play, where Florida went on a serious run in the SEC tournament just to even make it in the first place. So I think that there's more momentum on Florida. So I like Florida to win that game. And then you have Michigan versus Montana. And one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, you have a rematch of last year's first-round matchup between Michigan and Montana. I like Michigan winning that game against Montana, but I am not going to be going on a spread or anything because of the fact that Montana is one of the most efficient teams in the country. And that's going to do it for my first-round picks. I will be doing the rest of my predictions either tonight or tomorrow. We will see. So stay posted, and I'll be leaving you with another live stream where I will go through the second round all the way through to my champion. But that's going to do it for this installment of Scott Selections and my first March Madness live stream. I hope everybody takes it easy. And if you missed any points of it, don't be afraid to ask me some questions in the comments on the video. And I try to be as active as possible in the comment section. If you have any questions that you just didn't have time to ask during this live stream, I'll be more than happy to address any questions you have about matchups in the comment section below. But that's going to do it so far for March 18th for my first round projections on March Madness. And look forward to another live stream that we're going to be having. Thanks for joining us. It is us. I'll be probably streaming again later, because to be honest, March Madness is pretty much all I care about at this point for the next couple of weeks. Same to you, Scout. I thought you went back to work about 2 hours ago, but I guess you realized this was more important. I'm flattered, but try not to get fired while you watch this on the clock. But anyway, I'll probably be back later to do another live stream. And that being said, thanks to everybody who commented. Phil, thanks for commenting. Philly Joe, thanks for commenting. I just realized that I did not do my ratings. Sorry, Scout, I didn't rate all my plays yet. I will be doing that in my second video, which I will do before the tip-offs come. I didn't forget about it. Just remind me about it, and I'll go through my best bets for the first round after I finish going through the entire bracket. So thanks for joining us, Scott. Thanks for joining us, Brian. Thanks, Philly Joe. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody. And I'll probably be back on streaming again later, probably at night. So keep keep the notifications up, and it'll let you know when I'm doing another live stream. So have a good day, everybody, and good luck to everybody and their picks.